All right, I just want to test out my mic. Can you guys hear me well?
Sounds good.
Perfect. I know we're just waiting for the Forta account to join as well, but we had some connection issues, so perhaps you can just try again and request to speak, and I'll get you up here as a silent speaker. In the meantime, Andy, can you just introduce yourself? We'll be going over Forta Firewall. This is not their first KuCoin Fireside chat with you guys, but wanted to just get you back on to have to hear about all the updates that you guys have made in the meantime. Perhaps you can start with a high level introduction to yourself. What is your goal, and perhaps a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Andy. I lead the ecosystem team at Forta. Really excited to talk with everyone about Forta Firewall, which is a new security network we announced last Thursday. Goal for today for me is to sort of introduce this new network to all of you. Talk about what the benefits are to the DeFi ecosystem, especially. We think this is going to have a big impact on the frequency and severity of exploits, and so excited to dive into details. We haven't fully launched this network yet. We've just announced that it's coming in Q4. So I'll talk about a few things at a high level because we haven't announced, we haven't released all the details about everything, but those will be coming out over the subsequent weeks. We are shooting for an October launch, so keep an eye on that.
Awesome. And I guess the next question would be just to introduce Forta Firewall, what problems it aims to solve, alongside, perhaps just give us a little bit more detail into how Forta is different from any other competitors or similar projects in this space.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Tim. So Firewall is the next phase of the Forta network, and the purpose is to identify and block exploit transactions before they cause harm. So at a high level, what Firewall's doing is it is screening transactions before that a transaction is included and executed in a block. So we call these pre-chain transactions because they're not processed yet. We're screening them at that pre-chain level to determine if they're safe or malicious. And safe transactions will be processed normally. Malicious transactions will be blocked during execution. So let me dive into kind of different aspects of that process. So screening transactions. So for the last couple of years, Forta has been focused on threat detection. So we've developed a lot of technology. A lot of it relies on AI and machine learning to, in a very scalable way, look at on-chain activity and all the data that we have available and try and determine in real time what malicious activity is on chain. And so we've been identifying both exploits, smart contract exploits, as well as like end user scam activity. And we got really good at that over the last couple of years. The challenge with focusing just on detection is that, we were able to emit a lot of alerts about bad things that we saw on chain, but we weren't able to prevent those things from happening. And so what we're doing with Firewall is we're taking all that really cool, innovative detection technology and applying it the same way we were applying it before, but we're doing it earlier in the transaction lifecycle, and we're inserting it like into the transaction flow itself, so that we're actually able to not just alert someone that something bad's about to happen, but we can actually block that activity from going through entirely. And so we were able to plug in this sort of firewall screening directly into a DeFi protocol at the smart contract level. We can also plug in directly to rollups at like the RPC or sequencer level. But the idea is the same. We want to flag things that we think are bad as early as possible, and then prevent them from executing. So the benefit of doing this is that obviously it's we want to stop the exploit from happening, prevent the damage. We believe that doing it at sort of this stage in the transaction lifecycle is the most sort of reliable way to prevent an attack. Some of the other alternatives that listeners may be aware of are things like front running an attack. You can front run and try and pause your protocol, quickly. You can front run and try and rescue the funds that are at risk quickly. The challenge with front running as an approach is that you have to be faster than the attacker, and that's not always possible. And so maybe it works 10% of the time, 20% of the time, 30% of the time. Firewall can work 99% of the time. And so we think screening and blocking transactions at the pre-chain level is just a much more effective and reliable way of prevention as compared to some of the other alternatives that are available. Tim, you asked about kind of what the competitive landscape for this area looks like. Pre-chain security or on-chain security, as we're sort of referring to it now, is a very nascent corner of the security market. There's not a lot of there aren't a lot of solutions out there in the market. It's very early. We think we're going to sort of set a new trend here. I think over the next year or two, you're going to see a lot more of this happening, both at like the DeFi protocol level and with rollups, doing screening for both security and compliance reasons. So we think we're leading the charge here, and really excited to see kind of how the market reacts to it in October when it's actually live.
Perfect. I'd like you to just dive a little deeper into prevention. So you mentioned basically you're able to, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're able to detect the sort of malicious activity a lot earlier ahead of time. Can you just walk us through why that's important, other than the obvious reasons, and a little bit more about how it works?
Yep, sure. So the goal is to, and I guess some of this is coming from how traditionally technology companies, financial institutions, et cetera, have prevented malicious activity, right? You've got tens of thousands, millions of transactions happening every day on these networks, right? And prior to, firewall, there was no way to stop a malicious transaction from going through, right? Assuming that transaction was technically valid, meaning, it was executing a function call that exists and there was, a proper gas fees paid, that transaction would go through. Even if the protocol didn't want that transaction to go through, it would still happen, right? Because there was no way to sort of stop it. Different people can disagree on, whether we should or shouldn't, insert ourselves, into sort of the approval process of a transaction. But, we believe that, or we're of the opinion that, every DeFi project, every chain has the ability to manage its own risk. and should be able to choose for itself which transactions it wants to accept and which ones it wants to not accept. So if you agree with that premise, then being able to screen transactions for both security risks and compliance risks, makes sense. As long as there's technology to do it, let's do it. So how do we screen? So we're looking at all of the information that we have available on a transaction before it's executed. And we're looking at the sort of execution path of that transaction, meaning what functions in a smart contract is it calling, what addresses are involved in that transaction, what dollar amounts are involved in that transaction. Anything that we can look at on chain, we're feeding all of those inputs into a ML model, and that ML model is making a determination about whether that transaction is high risk or low risk. Now, what we do to go a level deeper here, every transaction that gets screened receives a risk score between 0 and 1. The closer the risk score is to 1, the higher the likelihood that it's malicious and an exploit. So, for example, if the firewall scores a transaction at 0.1, it's likely that's a safe transaction, normal user behavior. If firewall scores a transaction at 0.9, that is a much higher risk transaction. It looks more anomalous and likely an exploit. And teams that are using firewall can set the threshold above which they will block transactions. So, for example, a team can say, we're going to block every transaction that receives a risk score above 0.8. And so they'll filter based on that. So the way, a little bit more on like the ML side, how it works is, and this is how we've done detection for years and how other teams do detection as well today. You are training a model with a bunch of historical transaction data. So the cool thing about Web3 and blockchains is that all the transaction data is public. And so we can use all of that to train models over and over and over and over again. So we have, roughly, at least in sort of the EVM ecosystem, right? We've got 6-7 years of exploit transaction data going back to, 2017-ish, 2018 probably. That's when the first DeFi application sort of started to get tested, right? And some of those, involve malicious smart contracts that were deployed. So we've got 5 or 6 years of malicious smart contracts we can look at. And so we can train models based on that data. And then we can tune it over time. So we can keep running all of that transaction activity through the model. And we can tell it, okay, you identified this one correctly. Oh, this one was a false positive. We need to take that into account next time we see a transaction like that. It should actually be a lower risk score. And you keep doing that over and over and over again until you've tuned the models such that transactions that are receiving a risk score above 0.8 or 0.9 are all legitimate exploit transactions, and everything else is a safe transaction that looks like normal user behavior. So that's the process that we run through kind of at a granular level, and then we just kind of apply it at scale, to a particular DeFi protocols transactions or to a particular rollups transactions.
Awesome. And can you share some of the numbers or some of the achievements that you guys have made so far, just to contextualize where you guys are at with this particular product? Is it already live, or how can protocols start using it, for example?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned earlier in the intro, Firewall is launching publicly in October, so Q4, early Q4. We are integrating with a few teams right now in anticipation of that October launch. So if there are, a DeFi protocol teams or rollups listening, we would love to talk with you and, at a minimum, sort of test this out, and explore sort of what it would look like to get this integrated into your system. In terms of sort of measurable statistics, what I can say is on the performance side, we are able to detect essentially 99% of exploits at a very, very low false positive ratio. So what we like to say is, in every 100,000 transactions that we screen, the goal is to only flag, one sort of false positive. So that would be a 0.001% FP rate. 1 in 100,000 transactions is sort of what we're shooting for. You're never going to be perfect when you're screening and blocking transactions, especially when you're using machine learning. But we want to be as close to perfect as possible. So, and this is, we're pretty confident that this will be, the most effective solution out there, at least as it relates to, stopping exploit transactions. So those are some numbers on the performance side. And then, historically, when it comes to just detecting exploits, Forta regularly detects exploits in advance. And we tweet about a lot of that stuff. I think over the last 2 or 3 years, we've detected 40 plus exploits in advance, largely based on identifying a malicious smart contract that was deployed on chain that an attacker is using to carry out an exploit. So we can zero in on those contracts and sort of label them as bad pretty early, pretty quick. So that was one of the techniques that we used early on. And so you'll see our Twitter account. Whenever there's an exploit, we're usually tweeting something along those lines that it was detected in advance. So we do a lot of that. And Firewall is just kind of applying all that same, detection technology, just applying it earlier and embedding it into the transaction flow so that we can actually stop things from happening, not just detect them. So let me pause there, see if you have any follow-ups.
Yeah, I guess my final question is just more about what else you can share about upcoming, I guess, either new products or anything else in the roadmap that you can share with the KuCoin community here, as well as what the overall vision is for your your project, let's say a few years down the line as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll take the vision question and kind of maybe weave in the roadmap there. So Forta's vision is to generally, protect the Web3 ecosystem, protect smart contracts specifically. The way that we want to do that, the best way we think we can do that, going forward is to, we want to be able to screen every transaction happening on a public blockchain. That's every DeFi transaction in particular, because that's where most of the risk today is. So most of the TVL risk exists. So we want to be able to screen every transaction happening through a DeFi protocol. A lot of that transaction activity is moving to L2s, L3s, app chains. And so that's where a lot of that screening is likely to happen in the future. So we obviously want to be able to support all of the transaction activity at that level. And we want to, be able to prevent those exploits from happening. So in 2 or 3 years, we will have done our job if the number of exploits and the severity of those exploits is significantly reduced from, what you see today. And I think we will be successful in that. So that's our kind of long-term vision. In terms of roadmap, like I said, we're going to launch in October. So Firewall will be publicly available. There'll be a lot more details and documentation available for everyone too around October. The network is likely to decentralize further after October. So initially, Forta will be the only one screening transactions. Over time, we will have more teams screening those transactions. So you can imagine other security companies like a smart contract auditor, for example, doing screening maybe for their audit clients. There's other security teams out there that are focused on detection today. They can participate in the network as well. So there's an ecosystem sort of angle to this as well, which as the ecosystem lead at Forta, I will be trying to build out over the next 6 months. So my hope is that in that 1 to 2 year time frame, we've got a pretty robust ecosystem of security providers that are screening and blocking transactions in real time, not just Forta, and that we think that's the best way to sort of scale this, because different DeFi protocols, different rollups are trust different security providers out there. So we want to give everybody options, and we want, like I said, we want 100%. We think 100% of transactions should be screened for malicious activity and prevented if they are deemed to be malicious. And the easiest way to get there is by sort of leveraging the crowd and having them help screen, because transaction activity is likely to increase the more users get onboarded into DeFi and Web3. So as that transaction activity scales, our network's going to need to scale as well. So that's what we're excited about.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Andy. As always, this is not financial advice and just informational. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we end the spaces? I think now would be the time.
I might, I guess, to the extent that anyone listening is inclined to read a little bit more about Firewall, we did post kind of a teaser blog last Thursday. It's forta.org/blog. You'll see the Firewall post at the top. In that blog post, there's a link to a forum. If you are interested in speaking with us about Firewall, if you'd like a demo, we're happy to set that up for you. You can just reach out to that form in the blog post. I think it asks for sort of your name, email, Telegram, things like that, basic contact information. And someone from our team will be in touch with you real shortly, and we'll set some time up to chat. So I would just direct anybody listening who wants to learn more to that blog post, and to reach out to us in that form. We would love to chat with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for tuning in, everyone. And I'd like to thank Andy again for coming on and sharing everything about Forta Firewall. Definitely recommend go checking it out, follow their Twitter, etc. And then we have one final KuCoin fireside chat in about half an hour with Orderly Network. So hope you guys can tune in as well. So thanks again, Andy, and hope to see you very soon.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks all. Appreciate it.